Welcome to the Atlanta Men's Workshop speaker and workshop recordings. Atlanta Men's Workshop is held every spring and fall at the Rock Eagle 4-H campus in Eatonton, Georgia. That's just about an hour east of Atlanta, Georgia. Please visit our website at atlantamensworkshop.com or see the link below to find dates and details to join us. Partial scholarships are available to those in need. We hope you enjoy this presentation, and we hope you will come join us at the Rock. Until then, we shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then.
Alcoholic? Grateful to be sober, grateful to be here. What was that, Oh, man, what an honor. Thank you, Alan, for asking me. It's bright up here. I feel like I'm getting interrogated or something. And thanks. And thanks for asking me. Thanks for asking me to participate in my recovery. It's always an honor and a privilege to be asked to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous. When he called, I was like, oh, man, I'm honored. I'm grateful. Thank you so much. And then yesterday morning came along at 4:45 as I'm waking up to get on a plane. I'm like, this isn't all that great. Putting on the tie right before, and I'm like, oh, I love AA. I'm so proud, and that's just me. Like, I'm like just a bounce back and forth, grateful, not grateful, grateful, not grateful, and I stand here today absolutely honored to be with you guys, terrified, I'm like, good thing there's a bucket right there on my way up. I could throw up, and my sobriety date's the 23rd of October of 2002. And my sponsors, Mike S., my home group's the South Coast Speakers Meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We meet on a Wednesday night in Laguna Beach at 7:30, 286 St. Anne's in Laguna. If you're ever in the area, come see us. I get there at 5:30, set the meeting up, have dinner. If you want to come have dinner with me, I'd love to do that. And just overwhelmed with joy for the life I have today. I woke up this morning and I didn't come to. That's good, And I got into some prayer and meditation and just overwhelmed with just love and admiration for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what you've done for me. And I want to thank James for referring me. Thanks, James. And I don't know where this talk's going. I mean, we sat in the first meeting, the opening meeting. It was like, find it. I'm thinking, what's it, And everyone's talking about the vulnerability. And I'm like, yeah, not my favorite thing to do, And in front of 400 men. Like, that's great, We're going to get there, And so I don't know where it's going to go. I ask God to direct my words. I want to thank Joe for the prayer. Thank you. And God, if I go there, will you go there with me? And I know God's with me right now. And, just to tell you, this isn't the first time I went to AA. My first time I went to AA, some people were like, I don't know however they were talking about. I was 11 months old. I didn't have a drinking problem, but my mom did, and, my mom's a blackout drinker, which means I'll never know who my dad is, for all I know, my dad could be the cable guy. It's like, chicka bow now, and mom didn't even know she was pregnant till she was in labor, which is, a pretty cool story to tell in AA. She thought she was constipated, so she called 911, and she gave birth in her apartment, and the paramedics holding me, and the paramedics like, you need to name him. She's like, name what, and my mom's name is Patty, so she named me Patrick so she wouldn't forget my name, and before my mom passed away, she'd always send me a text and she'd say, make sure you tell them the truth, and I waited for that text today. And I guess the truth is I'm supposed to be a turd, and But my mom's the alcoholic who like drinks and drives and gets pulled over by a cop, and she like waits for the cop to walk up, and she like gets it, pinned down to like right when he's at the door, and then she opens the door to try to hit him in the private parts, and then the cop jumps back, and she jumps out of the car and tries to beat the cop up, and then he calls some friends, and pretty soon there's like 5 or 6 of them, and they arrest her and they take her to jail for drunk driving and assault on a police officer, which I think is pretty gangster, and she did that like 10 or 11 times and was being sentenced to prison to 10 years in prison, And she sat in the courtroom that day, and the attorney, in the middle of the sentencing, the judge is like, you can go to AA or go to prison for 10 years. And my mom sat there and thought about it, Prison, AA, and the attorney's like, dude, go to AA, idiot, and so he raised her hand, and off to AA she goes, and she brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous, when I was 11 months old, and the women in AA, man, I love the women, man, I still do, but, they met me at the door, and they grabbed me, and they took my mom, and they brought her all the way into the meeting, and they sat her all the way down in the middle of the meeting, and the women took care of me outside, I grew up, the women in Alcoholics Anonymous raised me. They would bring me toys. I was like 5th generation hand-me-down AA clothes, that kid. And the only reason I tell you that is if you're new, I want to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new, man, I hope that the message that I can carry tonight is that you can tell that I love Alcoholics Anonymous, there might not be anything in my story relate to and any of that, but like I love AA. And I tell you this story because if knowledge had anything to do with alcoholism, I'd never taken my first drink. I could recite the little readings, the Bill Wilson, I know who Bill Wilson was. We had that picture in my mom's house, like I knew who Bill was. I didn't know him, but I knew of him and all these people. And I remember growing up with Chuck Chamberlain and Paul O and these old timers, this is a normal deal, just like hanging out the picnics and every AA convention. I could recite all the readings. End of the meeting, I was like, keep coming back, and the old timers were like, we're saving this seat right here for you, kid, and I had no clue what I meant, but there's my seat, over there, and but they knew, my little friends from AA ran around AA, and we'd ding-dong ditch in the neighborhood. We'd hit the same house every Tuesday night at the Gong Show in Dana Point. I remember, it was like my life, and the guy would chase after us, and we'd run inside the AA meeting, my little friends, and we'd jump in the middle of you, and the guy's like, where are them damn kids? And you're like, there's no kids here, and you taught us all how to con and lie and manipulate, and but every night, man, the women would get the newcomer and they'd take her to Denny's, and I would fall asleep at Denny's every night. They would drink coffee and they'd smoke cigarettes and they'd put the newcomer in the middle of the booth and they'd keep her there till 2:15 after the bar closed. And I would fall asleep every night at Denny's, and sometimes I would come home in my apartment and there would be a woman detoxing on the couch. And I watched a woman die of alcoholism withdrawal on my couch. I remember telling my mom, never drink it ever. Like I was like the poster boy for AA. And I knew what Alcoholics Anonymous did for people. I remember when I was little, guy was like 5, and this guy, he'd taken a year. He goes, because AA, I got a full set of teeth. And everyone's like, all right, you got teeth, and my mom would be like, here, go meet Uncle Joe, and Joe would take me fishing, weirdo Joe, and little, all these guys in AA raised me, if love had anything to do with alcoholism, I've never taken my first drink, man. I'm telling you, the love that I've felt when I came into this retreat, all the way up into this moment, man, the love that I feel right here, right now. My brother who was, saying, you got this, like just the love of David, good to see you, like just the love that I feel was the love that I was raised with. But I didn't know until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous that alcoholism is a disease of perception, because my perception was not that. My perception was that nobody loved me, nobody liked me. I'm like the little kid in elementary school that smells like poopy pants and syrup. You know what I mean? I'm like super awkward and weird. My hair's like, I'm a nail biter. Any other nail biters here? I'm a nervous guy. I'm a bedwetter, pre-alcohol, You get one invite to the sleepover, and you peed your friend's cushion, and they never invite you back, Dude, I'm a right fielder on the baseball team. The right fielders here? Yeah, one guy. Yeah, one guy, dude. Loser. You know what I mean? Dude, the ball's never hit out there, and weirdo goes out in right field, and I don't know, I probably would have been diagnosed with ADD. I don't know, like I'm wandering off to left field. I'm looking for the dandelion. The coach is yelling at me, the other side of the field, weirdo. Okay. Guess there's a game going on, I'm like trying to blow off all those things in the dandelion. Somebody told me if I blew them all off, I can have a wish. You know what I mean? I'm like wishing for a different life out in left field, and like self-pity's my mode of operation long before I ever took my first drink, I remember one time I was on second base. I don't know how I got there. I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, where am I at? What am I doing? Kid cracked a line drive and I ran back to first base, and man, it was like a triple play in the wrong direction and little poopy pants back to the dugout. And as I'm walking in the dugout and all my friends are running out to their position, what I heard them say that day is, you're a failure, you're a loser, and you're no good. Right? Like, no idea where those thoughts came from, right? Like, I grew up in AA. No one was saying those things to me when I was a kid, right? But failure, loser, you're no good. My head had been telling me that my whole life. And I look at my mom, and she's in the stands, clapping. So proud of her kid, Not proud because I got a triple play in the wrong direction. My mom was proud because it took me an hour to get out of that stupid car to go to that stupid field to play that stupid game one more time. And my mom was proud to have enough courage to get out of the car that day, But I remember looking at my mom that day, saying if I only had a dad, that had never happened. I quickly built a belief system that was going to separate me from you long before I ever took my first drink, And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about these old ideas. We had to let go of them. The result was nil until we let go. Absolutely. That was an old idea that I carried into Alcoholics Anonymous that we'll get into once I get sober, But I don't know this as a little boy. I remember sit outside my mom's apartment window in my bedroom, wonder if my dad was ever coming home. And I'd sit there and I'd watch the car after car after car come drive down the street into my mom's apartment and make a right-hand turn and never pull into my mom's apartment complex. And the next car would come and I think, there's my dad. I get so excited and the car would never turn. And I remember being a little boy saying that if I don't have a dad, then there is no God. Like, I signed off to the God idea long before I took my first drink of alcohol. And if you're new, you're like, okay, great, funny stories, but like, what does this have to do with alcoholism? It has everything to do with alcoholism. I didn't know what alcoholism was. I'd go to AA, man, and they're newcomers. And I was like, yeah, I'm Pat and I'm an addict. Not in AA in LA, man. There's an addict in our room. Let's get him out of here, Well, flip the old guy off, try to piss him off, and I didn't know what alcoholism was, I didn't, back then when I was going to AA, you couldn't say alcoholic addict from the podium. They were, get you out of here, you're gonna dirty AA, And so when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, what happened was I had a member of AA that read that blue book. If you're new, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he read word for word and line for line, and he turned statements into questions. And there's a statement in there that talks about men and women are, restless, irritable, and discontent unless we can at once experience a sense of ease and comfort. And he said to me, what's the effect produced by alcohol for you? And I was like, I'm not alcoholic, grind it in. He's like, I didn't ask you if you're alcoholic. I said, what's the effect produced? I didn't know my story when I got here. I'm glad that we're a storytelling society because you telling me your story gave me the words, gave me the understanding of my own story in order for me to tell you. And he said, what's the effect produced by alcohol? And I had to look at the effect produced for alcohol for me. When I was 9 years old, I took my first drink of alcohol, and I was at an AA meeting of all places, and it was a Saturday night in Laguna Beach at the hospital. My little friends from AA, they were 14, I was 9 years old. We were messing with this newcomer. We didn't know he was a newcomer then, but he had a trench coat on, he had an eye patch, he was pissed, you know what I mean? I remember one time he got this board, and he pounded these nails in there. He goes, come with me, kids. And we followed him out. He goes, I'm going to put this behind the old timer's tire, and he put it behind the old timer's tire. He goes, I wonder how much serenity they have now, and dude, he was a trip. Rick A, I'll never forget him, and I threw a pebble at him like I always did. And he came running after me like he always did, and I ran outside the hospital when I was in the parking structure between the third and the fourth story, and those kids pulled out a bottle of Jose Cuervo. And I didn't know what alcohol was going to do to me or for me, but I knew that if I didn't drink it, those kids weren't going to like me that day. And the bottle got to me. I took a pull off the bottle. I hated the taste. It was disgusting. It was burned. I spit it out, and I was overcome with fear. And what that fear told me was that I wasn't going to be like the rest of my life. The bottle went around the second time. The second time, I was excited about getting that bottle. And I wasn't excited about getting drunk. I was excited that Poopy Pants was going to have some friends. And the bottle got to me, and I took a pull off that bottle, and I talked myself into holding that tequila down, and I can tell you the exact effect alcohol has on this alcoholic body. Like, in that moment, all that fear went away. Like in that moment, I felt like I connected to those kids. In that moment, I felt a part of. And I didn't run off to Skid Row at 9 years old, but I can tell you looking back that I knew something that was going to happen again. And I couldn't get booze at mom. She was in AA, And by 11 years old, a kid handed me a joint. I smoked this weed. A little elf chased me around the park. I hallucinated for 2 hours. I laughed forever. And I equated that all authority lie. They told me that if I smoke weed, bad things are going to happen, and nothing bad happened to me in that moment. One more time, I connected to you. One more time, I had a new group of friends. And by the time I was in high school, I grew up in the suburbs of LA. I'm from Orange County, the suburbs. But there's no gangsters till Poopy Pants showed up, because I was listening to like Eazy-E and NWA and Ice Cube, and I had size 50 Dickies pulled all the way up, and I had a 5XL sweatshirt. I drank St. Ides out of a brown paper bag. I poured beer in the curve for the dead homies, and I didn't have any dead homies, so I was getting ready for some, and I'm Poopy Pants, St. Ides, gang member, and this is called delusional if you're new, but I'm like the director of the show, and I create a plan, and my friends ended up robbing the pizza man on my plan, and the third guy stunned him with a stun gun, and the guy went down, and I didn't even do the crime, but I showed up to school next day, and there was 2 sheriffs and a detective, and they wanted to know about a strong arm robbery that I didn't do, but I didn't want to be a rat, so I took the fall for my friends, because I want you to like me more than anything else. And I went to juvenile hall for 6 months. That doesn't make me an alcoholic, just consequence of my disease at 16 years old. I was on house arrest. My little gang came to see me. They brought me a 40, a joint, and some Indian ink and thread and a needle. And they said I had to give myself a tattoo for my crazy life. And so I did. I gave myself 3 dots on my ankle, and I was like, mi vida loca in Mission Viejo. And I was like, orale, Holmes, and I'm a coward. I'm just terrified. I got big friends. I'm like the kid in the crew that talks a lot of, And then you want to fight, and I'm like, yeah, get him. And then my friends beat you up, and I get a little kick in there. I'm like, sucker, and like trying to paint the picture of the true character behind the podium. Terrified, man, of everything in my life. Terrified and scared, wanting you to like me more than anything else, man. And I drink alcohol, and it makes me think that I'm something that I'm not. And by the time I'm 17, my mom found a bottle of alcohol and some drugs in her house, and she was 16 years sober, active member in Alcoholics Anonymous, spoke all over the country at this time, and I'd throw full-blown parties at her house, and I came home, and she was standing there, and she said, you can't drink and do drugs in my house. And I don't know how you hear that, but I hear I need to hide it better, and so I hide it better for another month or two, and I come home, and she's standing there. I'm coming in out of a blackout, and she's standing there, and she looks at me, and she's like, you're kicked out of the house. And I went into my bedroom at 17, and I packed my backpack, and I walked by my mom, and I looked at her right in the eyes, and I said, I'm going to do everything I can to ruin your life. And I watched my mom's heart break right in that moment. And I don't know how you deal with shame and guilt, but this alcoholic arrogance came out. I puffed my chest. I grabbed my mom by the collar. I slammed her against the wall. F you. I hate you. You're never going to see me again. And I left that night, and I didn't call my mom for 1.5 years because I was going to make her pay for that decision. The first call that my mom got was a collect call. And I called her collect, and I said, Mom, I just got hit by a truck, and I need to go to the hospital. My mom was so terrified on the other end. She said, I don't know how I'm going to help you. And I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to pay for the hospital. And she said, well, why don't you just send me the address and I'll send them a check? And I'm like, oh, no, Mom, they need cash. She said, well, how am I going to give you cash? I'm in Orange County. You're in San Francisco. I said, there's a thing called Western Union right down the street from your work. I gave her the address to the liquor store. She ran down to that Western Union and wired me money just like that. And a week later, Clumsy got in another accident. And I'm in San Francisco. If anyone's familiar with the Tenderloin, I'm a Tenderloin kind of, I hear a woo-woo in a Tenderloin. I'm an Eddie and Jones kind of guy. I love the Tenderloin. I'm a panhandler. Any other panhandlers here? Yeah, that's right. You remember the loneliness of a panhandler, man. People look right through you like just trash. And you don't even exist, man. toss their change in the basket like this, like, you know what I mean? That look of disgust, man. And all my friends are not wanting me around. I'm the guy that just shows up at the party, you know what I mean? They have a party without inviting me, and they show up, and I just show up. Hey, guys, I'm here, and my friend's like, yeah, he even started talking about a monkey, and I said, yeah, you can get a pet monkey in Mexico. He goes, you can? I go, yeah, and I talked him in like 10 minutes, and all of a sudden we're in his truck heading to Tijuana to get a monkey. Hour before, he didn't even invite me, want me at the party. Now we're on our way to Tijuana to get a monkey, And we get over the border. When you get over the border, you got to have tacos and Coronas. And so he's buying tacos and he's buying Coronas, and I don't know anything about a physical allergy, what's about to happen. But I play the part. We go to the pet store, get a monkey. There's no monkeys there. But there's another pet store down the street. And 15 pet stores later, and Coronas in between, I end up blacking out. I come to back at my house in the United States in a bathtub, full of ice and cold water, completely naked with my girlfriend and my best friend looking over me as I had come out of an overdose. And he's looking at me with that look of disgust, and back out there I go, back out on the street I go, And I'm experiencing shame, and I'm experiencing guilt, and I'm on Powell and Market. I'm 98 pounds. I just hurting, man. And this girl started chalking it up with me. And then she moved me in her house. She detoxed me. She brought me back to life. All of a sudden, I got like 6 days sober, no AA, no meetings, got a girlfriend and a place to live. And I think that sobriety is about normal living. I think that if I have normal living, then everything's going to be all right. And I got a girlfriend, I got a house, and 45 days in, she's like, you need to get a job, which I thought was a little excessive, And then she started nagging about the job, and I'm like, man, I know I'm a smart guy. If I want to keep the house and keep the girl, I got to get a job. You know what I mean? So I did. I got a job in the Presidio, which is not the Tenderloin, in San Francisco, and my job was the assistant director for the YMCA at an elementary school after-school program. 45 days clean and sober. Assistant director at an elementary school program. And I showed up that first day, and there's 200 kids, and they love Patt. I can balance that chair on my chin today, and they want me to balance a ladder and balance this and that. And I'm playing the guy. I go home, and I kiss my girlfriend. I thank her for my life. The next morning I woke up, there's a little brown bag, lunch off to school I go, off to work I go, and I'm whistling, and I'm happy, joyous, and free, and I show up, and this little boy goes, hey, Pat, come here, I want you to meet somebody. And I go up, and he introduces me to his mom, and he says, Mom, meet my best friend, Pat. This little second grader. I got a best friend. I got a girlfriend, I got a place to live, never been happier in my life. And show up day 3, and I think this is about consequences. I go to AA meetings and I'd hear you talk about your consequences. And I think I don't have consequences like you, so I guess I'm not alcoholic. And I don't have consequences like you, so I'm not alcoholic. I didn't do that. I'm not alcoholic. And I'm separating myself, looking at the consequences. And what happened for me was day 3, I showed up and I'm pushing my best friend on a swing when the thought crossed my mind that a bag of heroin would be a good idea. He brought me a pint of tequila and some heroin, and I went into that elementary school bathroom and I nodded out on that toilet, man. And those little elementary school kids running in and out of that bathroom. And my best friend found me, and I came to, and the director of that camp, and that little boy, man, I look at that little boy, and he says to me, what happened, Pat? And the director tells me, you have 10 minutes to get off this property. I'm calling the cops. And as I'm leaving, as I'm walking out, man, that little boy looks at me and says, what happened, man? What happened? What happened, Pat? And I just start to cry, but I can't turn around and look at that little boy and let him see that I'm crying. And I call my mom and I said, Mom, I need help, man. I need some kind of help. The last thing I want to do is to put any kids in harm's way. And I call her, and she sends me to Betty Ford Treatment Center. And I go to treatment, and I don't know how it was for you when you went to treatment, but I fell in love with a girl in treatment. You know what I mean? It was like real love. I mean, we had the same sobriety date. You know what I mean? It was like, woo, woo, I was like, and my counselor, Mark, he's like, you got to do a 9-month program. And I was like, this is excessive, So I wrote my girlfriend, I wrote her a note. And I was like, I have to do a 9-month program, woe is me. And she wrote me a note back. It says, I have to do a 9-month program too. And I ran to my counselor, Mark, and I turned my will and life over to her as I understood God, and I said to her, I go, where do you want to go to sober living and live happily ever after? And she wanted to go to Hawaii. And I thought, man, this is romantic, and so I got on the plane, and if you're a heroin addict, you can drink Heineken on your way to sober living. Now, I already identified my alcoholism at 17. What my mom said to me that day, she said, you can stay here and be sober or go out on the streets and get loaded, but you need to make a choice. The alcoholic mind heard that I was kicked out of the house. What my mom said to me that day, I didn't know at that time. Alcohol told me to put my hands on my mom. My mom was my best friend. My mom was my hero. My mom was everything. And alcohol told me to put my hands on my mom. And here I am, 25 years old, thinking that I'm just an addict. When I got on the plane, I ordered a Heineken. 12 or 13 Heinekens later, I land in Hawaii. And I remember I go to AA and the old timers would say, it's the first drink to get you drunk. And I would think, you need to drink through that, old man, If you could get drunk on one beer, you need AA, I didn't understand, but that day, man, when I got off that plane, I stood there and I thought about it, sober living or bar. Sober living or bar. Not knowing that when I put the first drink in, I lost the power of choice. I didn't know that at the time, man. Sitting here thinking I have a decision. I have a choice. I don't know that when I put alcohol in my body that I lost every choice I was about to make. That alcohol was going to make every decision that I make in my life. That alcohol was going to take me to the gates of insanity or death. I didn't know. And I said, man, I'll go to sober living tomorrow. And I walked in the bar and I ordered another drink. And that girl ended up overdosing and dying and never making it to Hawaii. And my mom was 25 years sober. And my mom would wire me $150 at least once a week. But at that point, they told her she needed to go to Al-Anon, which we're about to get sober, you know what I mean? Because when your loved one goes to Al-Anon, the gig's up, you know what I mean? Because I call Mom, I'm like, Mom, I need money. She's like, no. I'm like, what do you mean no? She's like, no's a full sentence. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, well, Mom, if I only had a dad, I wouldn't be in this situation. It's all your fault. And I hit that guilt button and she'd wire me the money. And I call my mom and tell her how much I love her and how much she means to me and how she's my hero. And she'd wire me the money. And I call her and she'd set a boundary and I just bulldoze over that boundary because I'm a taker, man. Selfishness and self-centered is the root of my disease, man. I don't care who you are, what you are, anything in my life. I could care less. I'm going to get what I want. Alcohol is going to demand, right? My alcoholism is going to demand one more drink if I don't have a spiritual solution in my life. And I don't know that at the time. And I'm being demanded and I'm being told. And my mom said, I'm not giving you any more money, but I'll get you a plane ticket back to LA if you want it. That's all I'm doing for you. And so I said, all right, man, I'll get on the plane. I got on the plane and I landed at LAX and I went straight downtown to Skid Row. And I used to say that I lived on Skid Row, but I can tell you today that I survived Skid Row. And I tell you that I survived Skid Row, And as a straight man, I wander up to West Hollywood and I walk in those gay bars and I flirt with enough men to get enough alcohol and drugs on my body and hope that I make it out before I black out. And some days I do and some days I don't, man. And I start coming to with shame and guilt, man, on a deep level. I start coming to sexually assaulted one time. I start coming to sexually assaulted another time. And I come to, man, and I say, man, I'm not going to go back to that motel, man. I make that promise. I'm not going to go back to that motel. I can't do that anymore. And an hour later, let me in, begging my way back in that motel one more time. And on the 20th of October, 3 days before I got sober, I come to sexually assaulted for the 12th time. And I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. I can't live like this anymore. And I'm walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and I'm waiting for the truck to come in front of me so I can jump in front of that moving truck. And there's a truck coming. I'm timing it perfectly. And the thought crossed my mind that a pint of tequila would be a better idea. And my whole body shifted to the right, and I started walking to the liquor store, man. And one more time, alcohol saved my life, man. And I'll never forget that 30 minutes of madness and terror and the screams and the yelling at me and the anxiety, just yelling like a piece of I am, and just, and I'm sitting outside the liquor store. Man, the liquor store didn't open for 30 minutes, but I remember, never forget, when that lady opened that liquor store door, I got that sense of ease and comfort at once, man. And I ran in that liquor store, and I got a pint of tequila, and I went back on that wall, and I put half that bottle back. And when I put half that bottle back, man, all that shame and all that guilt and all that remorse and all that fear and all that loneliness went away just like that. And one more time, I have the fierce determination to go out there and live this thing called life one more time. And I don't know what your conversation says, but my conversation always says this time's going to be different, Pat. This time you're going to make it right with your mom, and you're going to go back to school, and you're going to get the job, and you're going to do this thing. And then the second thought said, drink that second half of that bottle. I put that second half of that bottle, and I blacked out for 3 days. And I came to 3 days later in a motel doing the same thing I did day in and day out before that. And that day the only thing I can say is I had a spiritual defense that stepped in between me and that first thought of that first drink. Came to with the same shame and the same guilt and the same remorse and the same self-hate and the same fear. But that morning, man, the thought crossed my mind to call your mom and ask for help. And I called my mom and I said, Mom, I need help. And my mom on there in the line said, Patrick, I can't help you anymore. She said, just stay right where you are, and someone from Alcoholics Anonymous will come and get you. She said, if I come and get you, I'm going to end up killing you. And she hung up on me. And I'm so grateful my mom didn't come pick me up that day. I would have manipulated her for $20 more, and I can guarantee you I wouldn't be staying here tonight. And my mom tried to call every high-profile old-timer in Laguna to help her kid, and none of them answered the phone. And the guy that answered the phone had just gotten off the phone with his doctor that told him he had stage 4 cancer and he had 6 months to live. And he knew if he didn't treat his alcoholism, he wasn't going to make it 6 months. And he didn't say, have the kid call me. He said, where's he at? And my mom gave him the address to the motel I was at, and he went and grabbed a new guy because we don't do 12-step calls alone. And they went down to that motel, and I was 98 pounds. I had 2 shoes, only one had a sole. I just stood on that bed just shaking violently, man. I'll never forget, on the end of that bed just shaking. And the guy barged in the front door, and he was like, my name's Jack, I'm an alcoholic. And I was like, whoa, bro. This other guy was on a walker. He's like, my name's John, I got 90 days sober, you know. And I was like, oh my God, these guys are losers, you know what I mean? Like, man, maybe Jules or someone, you know, maybe Joe, like these idiots, you guys send these guys, like what? Here I am separating myself of the message that came for fun and for free. My whole life I pushed you out this far away and said, love me, stay the heck, love me. I want love so bad, but I'm pushing you away. And one more time, that old idea said, man, if you only had a dad, man, these guys are going to fail you. Every coach has failed. You're going to trust these guys? And I know that when I called and asked for help, I walked into God's grace, man. I didn't know it then. But that guy Jack said, come with me, kid. And I got off the bed and I followed that guy. Followed that guy at that motel. And I got downstairs and he looked at me, he goes, just get in the van, kid. If you're new, just get in the car. Something happens in the car. I got in the van. And I sat there and those guys told me their stories, and they talked about losing the wife and losing the businesses and going to the hospital. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't go have a wife, I don't have kids, and I don't go to the hospital. Oh man, I go to the hospital, I drink and I go to the hospital. There guys, yeah, I drink and I go to the hospital too. You know, and I'm thinking, man, these guys ever gonna let me talk about me? They didn't let me talk about me. I ended up at a place called Charlie Street's, a low-bottom indigent detox. No therapist, nothing like that. No medicine, you know what I mean? There's a cot. Good luck. And men from AA sat down with that book and read word for word and line for line of that book. And they turned statements into questions. And I started to identify my alcoholism. He goes, where do you go when you drink? I go to jail. He goes, hey, Pete, come on over here. Pete came waddling on over. Pete had tattoos. He goes, when you drink, what happens to you, Pete? He goes, I go to prison. I go, I don't go to prison. He goes, where do you go? I go to jail. He goes, hey, John, come on over here. John came over and Jack goes, hey, John, when you drink, what happens to you? He goes, I go to jail. I go, hey, me too. Then John grabbed Fred, and Fred went to jail, and Bill went to jail, and all these guys, we all drank and went to jail. And we're like sitting there telling our stories. Hey, you know Popeye, and you know so-and-so, and we're telling our stories, and the little Jack guy came over. He said, Pat, when you're in jail, he's like, do you want to end up back in jail? I said, well, sometimes. He said, but the times you don't, what happens? I said, my mom comes and sees me. I make a promise to my mom. I'm not going to drink, man. Remember looking through that glass at your loved one? I look at disappointment, man. I'm looking at her and I make that promise, man. I mean the promise with everything in me. And I do the H&I and I go to church and I try to find something and I'm sitting there. They say, oh, Joel, roll it up. I give the homies all the commissary and I'm sitting there and he goes, what happened? I said, I don't know. I start having a conversation with myself. He said, what did the conversation say? I said, it always starts off with, Pat, alcohol's not your problem. If you just don't do meth, you'll be all right. He said, then what happened? I said, I got out of jail and I drank alcohol. He said, what happened? I said, I don't know. I wandered down the street. I met a new friend. Now we're business partners. He said, what happened? I said, I ended up back in jail. He said, oh, that's great. What happened that time? I said, my mom comes and sees me. I make a promise to my mom. I do the H&I. I turn my life over to, like Ochoa, roll it up. I'm sitting there waiting to go home. And I start having a conversation with myself. He said, what did the conversation? I said, Pat, you're not an alcoholic. If you just don't smoke crack, you'll be all right. He said, then what happened? I said, I got out of jail. I drank alcohol. I ended up in a motel for 7 days, stuck. He started laughing. He's, that's great. What happened that time? I said, I was arrested butt naked, and he laughed. He got a kick out of that. He told me about how he got arrested butt naked. And he looked at me and said, Pat, if you can concede both propositions, physical, that when you put alcohol into your body, you can't stop until you end up in jail. And more importantly, with a sober mind, you have a mind that's trying to drive you back to the thing that's going to kill you. He said you might be alcoholic. I'm alcoholic, and the guy lit up. He's like, he lit up like a chandelier. He's like, I got a new guy, I couldn't lie to myself, man. He left me in that silence long enough that I couldn't lie to myself. For the first time in my life, I could not BS this inside here. And I had conceded to my innermost self that I was alcoholic. Didn't even know it at the time. I can tell you that I'm telling you my story through the rear view mirror. I can't see it in the moment. And he looked at me and he talked about God. I said, I'm not going to believe in God. I don't care about God. I'm not into God. But he talked about the joy he felt when he walked his daughter down the aisle. And I was like, what? He goes, every Saturday I watch my grandkids play baseball and I have happiness for my grandkids. I came to believe that I too could have happiness and joy for another human being. I did the 3rd step prayer. I didn't believe in God until I was 10 years sober. But that day I got on my knees. God offered myself to thee to build me. I don't think God cared if I believed or didn't believe. He cared in the action. I did an inventory with that guy. It was a little chicken scratch. It wasn't like the next inventory I'm about to tell you. I did a 5th step. I was already making amends at 4 days sober. And the first amends to him was he told me that I had to go to a sober living because it was only a 10-day detox. And I told him, I said, no, I have to go to the Salvation Army. He said, why? I said, because I was court ordered there. He said, you were court ordered to the Salvation Army? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, great. I said, not really. He goes, why? I said, because I have a warrant. He goes, no, that's great. We're going to turn you in tomorrow, And I was like, nah, bro, miss me with all that. I'm not going to prison. He goes, no, everything's going to be all right. I said, no, I'm going to prison for 3.5 years. He goes, no, everything's going to be all right. You're sober now. You're on your 9th step and you have God in your life. I was like, nope, remember, I don't believe in God. He goes, you can borrow mine, and I thought that guy bumped his head, but the 7th step says, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. Leave me with what I need, right? The good and the bad, liability and asset. That means I no longer judge what it is. And God used my character defect of wanting you to like me that I listened to that guy, Jack. I got in his Porsche. We went down to court. I'm in a suit and I'm standing in front of the judge and the judge says, Mr. Ochoa? I said, yes, sir. Judge said, do you remember the last time you were in my courtroom, what I told you is going to happen? And I said, yes, sir. Judge said, what did I tell you? I said, you're going to sentence me to 3.5 years in prison if you see me in your courtroom again. He said, where are you at? I said, in your courtroom again. And he said, you're absolutely right. And he closed the folder, and the guard came and cuffed me up and took me down in that holding tank to go to prison for 3.5 years. And there goes that mind, man. Why'd you trust that man? You never trusted men your whole life. One more time you put trust in another man, and another man's failed you. He told you that everything was going to be all right. He told you that you were sober and you're going to prison. He told you that you can borrow his God, and obviously his God's pretty small. One more time, another man has failed you. And I got down on my knees in that holding tank, and I said, God, I don't believe that you exist. But John Ackerland, an old timer, rest in peace, told me to pray. Get me the heck out of here, will you? Amen. And I don't know, man, 4:30 in the afternoon, man, John's God didn't work either, because now I'm getting on the bus to go to prison. And I'm looking outside the window and I'm contemplating this sober thing. And I didn't realize till really recently that I was contemplating with God. I was making a commitment with God that I wanted to be sober and I wanted to help other people. And the engine started up and the door closed and off to prison I go, man. And the door opens and the guard gets in there and she says, Ochoa? And 3 of us raised our hand, and she says, Patrick? And I said, that's me. And the other 2 guys were mad, and I went in front of the judge, and the judge says, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to give you another chance. He said, there's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he pointed to my goofy sponsor over there. He goes, that guy's been fighting for you all day to get out of jail. If you're new, that's what we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous. We fight for each other one day at a time in this program. And that guy fought for my life, He said, but you're going straight from here to the Salvation Army. I was like, yes, sir, absolutely, And I went into the Salvation Army, and the guy that answered the phone was a guy I used to get loaded with. And see, God's working in my life long before I could see God working in my life, 90 days sober, man, I got ungrateful. You know what I mean? If you've ever been in the Salvation Army, they would make you work 60 hours a week for $3 a week gratuity, And I'm over this, and I left, I left the Salvation Army, and I went to go tell the judge what I did with his opportunity, and the judge looked at me and said, I'm glad that you're sober. I'm glad you're on your 9th step. I'm glad you're helping people. But he gave me a 100-day violation in jail. And my sponsor said, you're going to read the big book like your life depends on it. And sure enough, I did, man. I got that big book when I got in there, and I looked for the gratitude for the things in jail. And I did 100 days in jail. And so what happened was they were offering me drugs and alcohol. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm dodging and weaving. I'm reading the big book. I'm going to church, And this guy asked me, he said, hey, Pat, he goes, I like to drink and do drugs, but I can't stop. And you're sober. And how are you staying sober? And I sat that guy down and I read word for word and line for line out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like my sponsor done for me. What was I, 110 days sober? And I'm reading the book with this guy. And I'm talking about my drinking, and I'm talking about what happens when I put alcohol into my body, and I can't stop it when I'm in jail. And when I'm in jail, man, I have a sober mind that's driving me back to the thing that's going to kill me. And he's telling me all of his insanity sitting in jail. And I looked at him, I said, if you can concede both propositions, physical, that when you put alcohol in your body, you can't stop and end up in jail. And more importantly, with a sober mind, you have a mind that's driving you back to the homie that's going to give you dope. I said, you might be alcoholic. And he looked at me and said, Pat, I'm alcoholic. We did a 2nd step in there. And he went to the judge, and the judge offered him an opportunity to go to the Salvation Army. And we did a 3rd step at that institution. And I went to that, I got on a bus and I went 2 hours to go meet that guy every Sunday, like my sponsor had showed up for me every Sunday. And he had finished his 4th step, and we were about to do a 5th step, and I showed up that day, and that guy ended up leaving the Salvation Army, and he went and got loaded. He relapsed. And I called my sponsor, and I was like, I can't believe it. Maybe if I showed up 2 days a week, or maybe if I would have done this, or maybe if I would have done that. And he stopped me in my tracks. He said, Pat, who's still sober? And I came to realize that guy saved my life at that institution. That one alcoholic working with another alcoholic saved my life in that institution. He kept me sober in that institution. And I caught fire for AA, man. I became the little action figure in AA, Dude, I made amends to my mom. I was sponsoring guys. I had this whole all spies I sponsor, you know, I was managing their lives, you know. I was insane. I was on every committee, you know. And I finally got a girlfriend, you know, and well, back up. I made amends to my mom, 90 days sober, you know, and I sat down with my mom and I told her that when I called and asked for money, it was a lie. And she was like, I know. I was like, man, I asked for money, it was a lie. She said, I know. I was like, then why'd you give me money? She said, because when you left my house at 17, you broke my heart. And I stayed up every day for 10 years terrified I was going to get the call that you bled out and I was going to have to come identify the body. And I just broke, man. Just waterfall crying. The real harm wasn't that I lied to my mom. The real harm was that I robbed my mom of her security day in and day out for one more hit, man. I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, what can I do to make it right? And she said, I just want you to get in the middle of AA and help as many people as you can. And I ran back to my sponsor. I was like, this thing's amazing. This AA thing, me and my mom love each other. He said, what about the money? I said, she don't want the money. She just wants me to help people. He said, AA wants you to pay it back, you know. And I said, how am I going to pay her back $100,000? He goes, $25 at a time, you know. I thought, man, this guy bumped his head, you know. He's like, I want you to write a note that says, Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today, and leave her $25 every week. Mom, I love you and I appreciate you, $25. Mom, every week I write this note. Mom, I love. And then like 6 months in, he goes, man, you're doing a good job. I finally got an attaboy from my sponsor, you know what I mean? Doing a good job. I'm like, yeah, stoked. You know, he said, I want you to write the note every day. I'm thinking, that's a punishment. What do you mean, you know? He goes, and I want you to write a little memory in there when you were a little boy. Write a memory in that note. And so every day I'm writing the notes, and once a week I'm giving her the money, and every day I'm writing the notes, and oh man, these little memories are turning into, I'm starting to cry, you know, and I even got a little teardrop on my note. I even circled it, crying, you know. And I'm falling in love with my mom, and this is like weird, you know what I mean? Like me and my mom are like falling in love. It's like awkward. You're getting a girlfriend. I'm like, I want a girlfriend, you know, not my mom, you know, and so I call my sponsor. I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. And he says, you don't have to do it anymore if you don't want. He said, but how free do you want to be, kid? Mom, I love you and I appreciate you today. You know, I want to be free, you know. And I can tell you, thank God for strong sponsorship. I wrote my mom a text, sent my mom a card, right, or called my mom just about every day to the day that my mom died. And finally I got a girlfriend, which I thought was good, you know. And I got a girlfriend, and you know those early sober girlfriends, you know, you love each other, hate each other, love each other, hate each other, in the relationship, out of the relationship. And we broke up, and I started sleeping with her best friend, you know, in the rooms, you know, and girlfriend's there, best friend's there kind of deal in the home group. And you guys relate? Okay, good, you know, and you know, and so she wanted to go to Vegas. We didn't even like each other. I just slept with her best friend, so we went to Vegas for the weekend, and she got pregnant, you know, and that wasn't part of the plan. I tried every manipulation tactic to get rid of that thing, you know what I mean? Because I want to still do the thing, you know? And she said, no, I'm going to keep the kid. And so I had to get it off with her best friend and tell her, hey, she's pregnant. I'm going to try to be a dad, you know? And I talked to my sponsor, and so I tried to be a dad, you know, and I'm sitting in the labor room, my son being born, and my son came out, and I looked right into the eyes of God, you know. I mean, if you're new, the message isn't have babies and find God. That's not the message here, you know, but it was like the chisel that knocked the ice off of my heart, man. I didn't know that I could love another human being or be loved like I have a relationship with my son, you know. And her best friend ended up making amends to her for us sleeping together, you know. Which, whatever, we have opinion there, but that drove us to therapy every week for 2 years to talk about my behavior, you know? And my son was 2. She finally was like, yo, like, I can't do this anymore. And so we split up our meetings based on, what do you call it, custody. You get Sunday night, I get Monday night kind of deal. And man, my sponsor, remember when I was new, he said, you think drugs and alcohol are your problem? I'm like, that's why I'm in detox. He said, no, selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of your problems. And he said, what we're going to do to you in Alcoholics Anonymous is turn you into a giver. I didn't know what that meant, man. I thought I was going to be the Dalai Lama or something, you know. And I was at my son. I'd call the women in AA. I didn't know how to be a dad, man. I didn't have a dad. I don't know how to be a dad. And the women taught me how to be a dad. And he cried, and I put him on my head, and he never didn't cry up there. So me and him just cruised around all the time with him on my head, And one time I was at my house, and I stood up, and I put my son's head, I put him on my head, and as I'm putting him on my head, I put his head right into a ceiling fan. It was like, whack, whack. My sponsee grabbed my kid, and I went to the back room. I was like, God, I don't believe that you exist, but old man John told me to pray. What the heck do I do, And I heard a voice in the closet that was like, you need to call the doctor, dude, Profound. And I got to call the doctor, and the doctor told me what to do. I looked at my boy, and nothing was wrong with him. But what happened for me, for the first time in my life, I cared more about another human being than I cared about myself. Selfishness and self-centeredness walked through the door on the 23rd of October of 2002. Strong sponsorship, a home group, and things like this, man, I become a little bit selfish each time, And, so what happened was, I don't know, for 8 years I cheated on women. Let's just call it what it is, First 8 years of my sobriety, man, cheated on every single girlfriend I had. And I go home and want to kill myself every night, man. And they tell me things like, get out of self, help others. More sponsees, man. Now I got 10 rows, Get out of self, help others. I'm on 53 committees, And I just hate myself, man. And 8 years sober, man, one more relationship breaks, and I'm driving my car 98 miles an hour down a street called Liso Viejo. I told myself when my car got 100 miles an hour, I was going to barrel my car in oncoming traffic. My car was at 98 and about to barrel the car in oncoming traffic, and I hear in the back seat was like, you need to call that Jonathan from your Tuesday night meeting. I'm going to look back there it was midnight, man. This guy was 60 years old. I called him thinking he wasn't going to answer. It was midnight. He answered in one ring like that. He said, I've been waiting for this call for a year. And he was laying in bed with his wife, and I told him I'm going to kill myself. And he said, before you kill yourself, will you meet me at Denny's? I said, I'll meet you there, And he said, no, I'm going to stay on the phone till you get there. Because he knew I wasn't going to make it, man. And he stayed on the phone with me for 30 minutes, and I walked into Denny's, and he had the big book open to page 52, and he started talking about these bedevilments. Having trouble with personal relationships, can't control your emotional nature, prey to misery. I'm just bawling, identifying with every single one of them. Full of fear, useless, all those things, man. And he looked at me and he said, what you think is a broken relationship, he said, what you're suffering from is untreated alcoholism. And he said, at 17 years old, I had a revolver in my mouth. I was 17 years sober. I was going to kill myself when I reached out to a man by the name of Luther Wood. And Luther Wood, who reached out to a man by the name of Clint Hodges. And Clint Hodges, who reached out to a man by the name of Don Pritz. And through that line of those sponsors, man, I had some kind of hope, man. I wasn't hearing about untreated alcoholism, suicidal, cheating on women. I wasn't hearing about these things, man. I thought, I was just so much secret and shame. And he said, I won't sponsor you because I don't want your blood on my hands. He said, well, you will go through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with me. And I went back through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with that man. I had a secret which I already told you, man, that I slept with men for crack cocaine day in and day out. I couldn't tell my first sponsor that. I couldn't tell you that I didn't believe in God. And I had to write a list. It's the things that blocked me from having a relationship with you. Power, control, money, what you guys in Alcoholics Anonymous thought about me. And every night I said, God, please take away these things that stand in the way of me having a better relationship with you. And for 3 months, man, I argued and I battled with God as I couldn't cross any of these things out. And I crossed out control and I crossed out money. And the last thing, there was 2 things on there left. What you guys in AA think about me and God. And I'm looking at this one last thing and I can't cross it out. And I'm just crying at night. And I'm not sleeping for 7 days. I'm 30 pounds underweight. I'm suicidal. I was suicidal from 8 when I called him till I was 10 years sober. And I look at God one day and I just said, you know what? I can't deal with this pain anymore. And I crossed out that last one, and the last thing on that list, it was 3:30 in the morning, and the last thing on that list was God. And I called my sponsor and I said, he answered the phone at 4 in the morning. And I told him my experience. I talked about the loneliness in the middle of the night, sitting with just me and God. And he opened the book and it talks about in the last analysis, that's where God is found. And he asked me if I was willing to make this third step decision. And I got in my car at 5 a.m. and I drove up to Tustin to a church, Unity Church, and got in this lawn and I got on my knees, and for the first time in my life, I made my first real decision. And started writing inventory. And I was suicidal for 1.5 years going through the steps. And I was on my 9th step, and I couldn't do it anymore. I called my sponsor on a bridge. I'm going to jump off on a cliff. I said, I'm going to jump off this cliff. I can't do this anymore. And he said, how's that amends to your dad coming along? I said, I'm not going to make it. I can't do it. I can't make amends to my dad. And he said, I love you like a son. He said, you think you can meet me at the meeting tomorrow so I can say goodbye to you before you kill yourself? I started to form a relationship with another man. I said, I'll see you at the meeting tomorrow. And I got off the cliff and I went, and I showed up to that meeting, and he grabbed me and he kissed me on the cheek like I guess dads do. I don't know, it was weird, it was like awkward. And he said, I'll see you at the meeting tomorrow, right? And I said, I'll see you at the meeting tomorrow. And I would call him on the cliff, I'm going to jump off. He said, you promised me you'd see me at the meeting tomorrow. And I'd get off the cliff and I would go to the meeting. And we did this dance for 3 months, 3 or 4 months. And he'd ask me every day, how's it amends to your dad coming along? I said, I'm not going to make that amends. I can't make an amends to my dad. Finally, I said, don't call that sponsor guy, man. He's going to make you meet him at the meeting, So I pulled over on the 57 bridge over the 5 freeway in Anaheim, and I said, I got out of the car, and I said, right before I got out of the car, I said, God, you have 10 seconds because I'm jumping off this bridge onto the freeway below. And I got to the headlight of my car, and my phone rang. And it was an unknown number, and I answered the unknown number, and I said, hello, this is Pat, and this kid said, this is Chris. And I don't know if you remember me, but when I came to AA, you saved my life. And he said, I'm leaving Alcoholics Anonymous because I'm going to go get loaded. And my feet were trained in Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, no, Chris, we don't drink one day at a time here. And I started to talk about my thinking that precedes the first drink. And I started talking about the thought after the thought after the thought after the thought. And I had an intuitive thought that said, Chris, there's a meeting starting at the Canyon Club in Laguna Beach. Will you meet me down there? It was 30 minutes, and it took me 30 minutes to get in my car and drive 30 miles south. And I walked into the Canyon Club, and there was Chris, and Chris was crying, and Chris asked me to be his sponsor. And the words that came out of my mouth, I said, yes, I'll be your sponsor. Now, I didn't tell him I was going to kill myself, But I just said, yes, I'll be your sponsor, man. And I went home that night, and I was arguing with God in the middle of the night. Why? Why do you have to put another schlep in my life to help and be a service to? I just want to die. I'm over it. I can't deal with this pain anymore. And it was like a hand that pushed me off the couch. And I was in the fetal position on the floor, just screaming and crying, man, just excruciating pain. When the words came out of my mouth, man, I don't have a part in that relationship with my dad. My mom got pregnant in a blackout. But where are my mistakes? Where have I been selfish and self-centered and self-seeking in every relationship in my life? That little boy on the baseball field that looked at his mom and said, if I only had a dad, that had never happened. If I only had a dad to teach me how to show up in life. If I only had a dad to love me unconditionally. If I only had a dad to teach me, Bob. If I only would have a girlfriend, teach me how to live life. Every relationship in my life I blamed on my dad. And it was like the victim was pulled out and the power of God, which is love, went deep down within, man. And I got up and I fell asleep just like that. Just like that. And I can tell you I haven't had to act in that behavior since I called that man that day. When my son was second grade, he was in second grade, so it's at 9 years old. I went to go pick him up at his mom's house, and it was pitch black, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was pitch black, blinds folded, and I went to give him a Valentine's Day gift because I love my son, And I walked in, and he was just like deer in the headlights, and I got him, and I said, let's go to dinner, and I called his mom, and I said, we're going to go to dinner. Whenever you get back or whatever you're doing, just let us know. And I took him to dinner, and we sat down, and we go to eat food, and he starts crying. And he's bawling. And I don't understand what's wrong with my boy, man. I'm looking at him, I don't understand. And he said, Dad, he said, I'm afraid to eat. I go, why are you afraid to eat? He said, because if I eat, I'm going to choke. And if I choke, I'm going to die. And I don't have any control in this, man. And I start getting frustrated, man. I start getting annoyed. And I'm like, you got to eat, you know. And he doesn't eat for 3 days. And I'm annoyed with him. And I'm arguing with him. And I'm sitting at dinner one day. And the thought crosses my mind to pray with my kid. I said, will you pray? And he said, yeah, I'll pray. And I held his hands. And then the next thought came, why don't you feed your son softer food? And I fed him softer food. And he started to eat. And he got through that fear. And then all of a sudden he got to this place where he, like really right after, shortly after that, he didn't want to go to bed at night because he was going to die in his sleep. And then the next thing he said, if I die in my sleep, I'm going to miss you, Dad. I don't hear miss me, Dad. I hear not following my directions. And so I'm arguing with him. And so he doesn't sleep for 3 days, man. And 3 days into this deal, I have an intuitive thought that says, why don't you pray with your kid? And I say a prayer with my kid, and the next intuitive thought comes, and it says to me, why don't you read a book with your boy? And I read a book with my son, and he falls asleep on my chest. Boom, just like that. And a couple of weeks later, we go to drop him off at school, and he goes, Dad, I don't want to go to school. And I go, why don't you want to go to school, son? He said, because I'm afraid to die, and I don't want to die. Now, faith for me is a confident trust born of experience, man. I have 2 experiences prior that show that when I get frustrated and annoyed, man, it doesn't help anything. But when I say a prayer, right, it all comes to me. And we said a prayer, and I said to my son, I said, when your dad's afraid, what does he do? And he said, when you're afraid, Dad, you're a service in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, how do you think you can be a service at school? He said, I don't know, but I'll go try to find out. And he went to school, and I went to work, and I went and picked him up, and he had a smile this big on his face. He said, you won't believe it, Dad. I said, what happened? He said, I saw this kid way out on the playground, so I ran out there to meet him, and I guess the kid was crying. I go, what was he crying about? He said he was crying because his parents were getting a divorce, and he was going to have to stay half time at his mom's and half time at his dad's. My son had been doing this for, 10 years. And he was able to share with that boy how he's been able to get through it, you know. And my son learned how to walk through his fear through prayer and service. And you told me 70 minutes. And you shortchanging me, brother. And so what happened was long story short, I was speaking in another, I went to go pick him. I came back from Portland, Oregon, and I went to go pick him up on a Sunday, and I get in the car, and he goes, Dad, he goes, did you forget to pray? And I was like, what? You know? And so he said a prayer, and we went and got food, and we got to my apartment complex, and he said, he gets out of the car, and this girl's walking down the apartment complex, and she's punching windows, and she's screaming. And I look at my son. He looks at me, doesn't know what to do. I go, just go inside and separate the food. And he goes inside, and I go, God, please direct my next action. And the girl came walking up to me. But if I don't pray, I can't see that God's working in my life. And she came up to me, and she said, my boyfriend took my phone. Can I use your phone to call my dad? I said, yes, you can. Here's my phone. And she's talking to her dad, and I said, God, please direct my next action. And she said, my dad wants to talk to you. And I gave her the phone. She gave me the phone. I said, and her dad said, it's going to take me an hour to get there. We walked my daughter inside and just keep her safe for an hour. God directed my next action. And I walked into my house, and I took her into my bathroom, and I cleaned off her arms because she had cut her arms all up and down with a knife that she had. I said, I'll be right back. And I walked in, and my son had separated the food into 3 plates, man. He said, Dad, you think she wants to eat? I said, I don't know. Why don't you go ask her? And he walked in, and he saw her, and he grabbed her. He said, every time I'm sad, I pray. Will you pray with me? And he says a prayer with this girl. I poked my head around the corner, and I just start to cry, man. Love and gratitude for Alcoholics Anonymous. For what you guys taught me, I've taught my son. And he said, every time I'm done praying, he said, I meditate. Will you meditate with me? I mean, she was stuck. She had nowhere to go, you know. And he's breathing God in, and he's breathing fear out. And he's breathing God in, he's breathing fear out. Man, he came over, he sat at the table, and he said, Dad, let's say a prayer. And he said a prayer, and he thanked God for allowing us to be of service to that girl. And her dad called and he said, I want to go with you, Dad. And he walked out and the 64 Impala came rolling up. Man, these gangsters came out of the car and he walked right up to the dad. He goes, hi, I'm Eden. And he said, we want to thank you for allowing us to be a service to your daughter. He turned around and walked away. I wanted to ask that boy to be my sponsor. You know what I mean? That young man is 18 years old. He graduated with a 4.5 grade point average. I was like, how'd you do that? He said, honors, Dad. I don't know what that means, but he's, I tried to help him get into college. He said, you never went to college. How are you going to help me, I'll tell you who he called. He called guys in Alcoholics Anonymous that I sponsor that went back to college. I asked him, he got into the FIT in New York on his own. He qualified for he applied for 3 colleges, got into all 3 of them, and he chose the leading school in fashion and design. And I asked him, I said, Eden, what would you equate your success to? This fast, he said, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, Dad. He said, all the men that you brought into my life, rest in peace, T.J. Bryant. He was close to T.J. Bryant, overdosed and died. Johnny M, in and out of AA for 8 years, been sober 9 years, close with him. He said, because all those men in my life taught me that drinking and drugs was a bad idea and that going to college was a better move. I owe my life to Alcoholics Anonymous. Not just for what you've done for me, but what you've done for my son. That when anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there, and for that I am responsible. I have a responsibility in Alcoholics Anonymous. That if you ask me to do something, the answer is yes. An old man, old timer John Ackerland said, you just say yes to Alcoholics Anonymous, kid. I was like, why? I don't want to do that. He said, because that's where God wants you to be. And I don't know why God wants me here tonight. I just said yes and showed up. When my mom died, man, my mom died with 44 years sober. My mom was on hospice, man, and I didn't want to fucking miss my mom's last breath. And she would sit there and tell me, don't sit here and watch me die, kid. Go out there and live your life. So come back tomorrow and give me a kiss, will you? And I did that, man. It was the hardest thing I did. And I was going to Idaho to speak at a convention. And I prayed. I go, God, I don't know what you want from me. And the message was to be a service to Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't like that message. So I prayed 2-3 days in a row. I get the same message. Then I call my sponsor and he says, what did God want you to do? So I gave my mom a kiss. I went to Idaho to speak at this convention. I get a call Saturday night. Your mom's been unresponsive for 3 days. You need to hurry up and get back. She wants to say goodbye to you before she dies. And I got on my knees in front of 1,000 young people and I said, God, what do you want from me? And I heard the message loud and clear. You need to be a service to Alcoholics Anonymous, kid. And I gave a talk that night, and the next morning I flew home and I got in my car. I drove 100 miles an hour to where my mom was on hospice. And I went into the front door where my mom was, and my mom sat straight up like this. Felt spirit walk in the room that day. I went into my mom's arms and she held on to me and she said, Patto, I want you to know you did the right thing. She said, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that was the last words that my mom said, man. And 3 days later, my mom died and my heart broke. But I can tell you exactly what happened for me, and I believe what happened for my mom in that moment was I honored my mom's amends all the way to the day that my mom died. All she wanted me to do is to get in the middle of you and help as many alcoholics as I could. And I honored that amends to my mom, to the day that my mom died. And I believe there was a level of forgiveness that was so profound. I kissed my mom on the forehead and I said, Patio, I want you to know from this day forward, I'll carry on your legacy in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new, Alcoholics Anonymous is a lot more than just not drinking, man. Alcoholics Anonymous is a process of growing up. And I thank you, old timers, for continuing to show up to Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for holding on the light for me so that I can hold the light on for someone else. My name is Pat, I'm an alcoholic, and I love you all. Thanks.